Now, this session, as you know, is being chaired by Professor Meenakshi Pava ma'am. She is from Lucknow University. Yesterday we heard ma'am her lecture that was on water, wonderful lecture, and it really generated thought-provoking ideas among the participants. We were sitting there. So I'm very happy to invite her for her remarks for this session. Thank you, ma'am.
Esteemed participants and students. It has been a very stimulating session, and it has been an honor and privilege to be the chair. And what we gather from the two papers presented this morning is, I think, what sums up the realm of the critical inquiry of cultural studies. The first presenter of this morning's session was Dr. Sudhir Narayan Singh, who presented his paper titled Cultural Studies in Emerging Scenario, Observations and Investigations into Language and Literature. And we finished with Dr. Rahul Chaturvedi's paper, which was Understanding Fandom. We look at the sweep of the area from observation and investigations into language and literature to fandom. So what Dr. Sudhir Narayan Singh talked about, I'll briefly sum up his arguments for the benefit of those who may have walked in and sauntered into the audience a bit later than when he began. He talked about how media talks about reading the lines rather than how it misses the woods for the trees, and he spoke about missing reading in between the lines. And then he spoke about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, for which he referred to the C. Rajagopalachari edition, and he talked about how women in those hoary days of antiquity were empowered to choose their partners, their life partners, from any varn of any of the four varns. They had the liberty, while men didn't have the freedom to choose from any varn, which brings us to reflect the kind of women empowerment women had in those days, and which also brings us to reflect what changed in between to bring the gap where the struggle is on for this empowerment to take place anew. And then he went on to develop another idea, which was part of his paper, which was to talk about the language. And he talked about the gender-neutral language, and in which he spoke about how there were also language biases during the colonial times, in which he spoke about certain examples, of which I will, of course, bring in one or two. He talked about how the etymology of the word shampoo is traced back to Hindi, and how the word Maharaja, according to the British, was not put into the Oxford English Language Dictionary as a Indian king, but rather as an Indian prince, because they wanted him to be subservient to the Queen of England. So the cultural transference was not given the privilege that it truly deserved in translation, and was given a word of subjugation on the contrary. And he also talked about the idea of Orientalism as a kind of a cultural dustbin, where everything was kind of pitted into Orientalism, which we all know was well argued against by Edward Said in his seminal work, Orientalism, which was published in the year 1978, and we know that kind of spawned an entire new area of inquiry of post-colonialism, and that kind of marks that area of inquiry. And he also talked about the information highway, and he also brought in, and some of my students are sitting here, and brought into focus the portmanteau word of phubbing, which is a combination of the word PH from phone, P-H-O-N-E, and snubbing, S-N-U-B-B-I-N-G, and combined to form the word phubbing, which is nothing but a new term in social etiquette, which you're not supposed to pick up a phone when you are in company. But I think most of us are guilty of phubbing, which you're not supposed to be doing. It's part of the social etiquette now, and he brought our focus onto that portmanteau word. And he also brought into focus the word how hero privileged over the masculine word for years, and how Shiroz. In fact, the city where I come from, there is a cafe called Shiroz, which is a very, very hotspot place for the youngsters to frequent, and you'll be happy to know that it is run by acid survivors, and it's a very, very happening place. So he argued for all-inclusive terms in gender neutrality. And of course, we all are also aware that our present CJI of Supreme Court, Justice Chandrachud, has argued for and spoken about having a gender-neutral list for the judges, for the lawyers, to be sensitized for gender-neutral terms. And he also focused on the high and the low culture. He talked about the platter of salad when he talked about inclusion rather than the melting pot. And that kind of takes me back to the American civilizational history, where everybody who went to America went into the so-called American melting pot and came out as an American. But now, with so much of identity politics at play, everybody has a hyphenated identity, and that is why you have a Russian American, you have an Indian American, and a Polish American, and the list goes on. So from the American melting pot, where everybody was an American, now you have not so much as a salad bowl, but rather what they call as a rainbow, where everybody has a distinctive identity and needs to be reflected, and nobody has to sublimate it to be made into an American. The second presenter of the session, Dr. Rahul Chaturvedi's paper on studying fandom, talked about, by opening remarks of his were on the definition of Matthew Arnold about what Arnoldian definition of what was culture, and that which is, of course, which is refined, and how culture needs to be distinguished from civilization. And then he went on to distinguish, he spoke about Raymond Williams and Hogarth, and how they kind of brought about the Arnoldian concept and how it now stands challenged. And how cultures are outright political, rooted in, that's what they both argued, that they are rooted in the liberal discourse and rooted in exclusion. And obviously it deals with the political, since it's critical of existing political, social, hierarchical structures. And what Dr. Chaturvedi also developed and discussed at length in very, very lucid presentation of his was how cultural studies refrains from being judgmental and rests on the premise that each human experience is unique and hence different. And that obviously takes us from that there are no right and wrongs, and that there are no stances that we can take, whether one is right or the other wrong. And that, also takes us to the basic premise of communication, where, where they say that words by themselves have no meaning, where every human brain is unique and each word is processed according to each human experience. Therefore, the word by itself has no meaning. Therefore, the semiotics, it kind of intersects the realm of semiotics. And why do I say that? Because each human experience adds meaning to the word. For instance, the golden premise of communication is that two people can be right. And that's also the culture of communication. And how does that happen? Because, for instance, the word danger. To you, the word danger could mean going up in a high-speed motorbike or a car race, whereas to a couple who is committed to a biking or a motor race, they could probably dump the child and finish a race without even arguing that it is difficult. So he talks about the idea and problematize the idea of canonization of cultural studies and how culture can be dominant way of life or the non-dominant way of life. He also delved into the process of meaning making of culture and how it is inscribed in all processes and practical aspects of Frampton. So it was a very, very enriching and a very, very lucid, both papers were comprehensive and lucid. So thank you, and let's give both the presenters a huge round of applause. Thank you.
I would like to extend my profound gratitude for Meenakshi Pawar ma'am, for Sudhir Narayan Singh sir, for Rahul Chaturvedi sir.